First of all, now it's the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Martin Luther King.
Just a year, that's correct.
You were 25 at the time.
Probably.
What are your thoughts about the state of the fight of Martin Luther King in our days, half century later?
Well, you know, Dr. King was organizing the Poor People's Campaign when he was assassinated. And the Poor People's Campaign had several goals, but one of the most important ones was the demand for guaranteed income for everyone. King said that this was a capitalist system. People don't remember that King. They wrote that King out of the script, but that's who was killed. And he said all of this in a speech as a prelude to the Poor People's Campaign organizing called Where Do We Go From Here? And he said, you know, the black has won the right to vote after 100 years after slavery. We have the right to use public accommodations and not be discriminated against. But where do we go from here? And he said, I asked this question because I say, where are we now after we won these two big victories? And he summed it up by saying, blacks have half of what is good and double of what is bad. And therefore, where do we go from here? And so he talked about the analysis of capitalism and slavery and all of the relationship between all of these things and why blacks continue to be living at the bottom of life in America. So in the 50 years since Dr. King organized the Poor People's Campaign, which did go forward despite his assassination, but not for a very long time, and the Black Panther Party was, of course, in existence for a very short time at that moment, I would ask the same question, and I would say the answer is maybe worse in terms of black people in America, despite the appearance of few quote-unquote successes, if you want to call Oprah a success, or if you want to call Obama a success. But barring these little individual successes and little stories, you know, that make the magazine and make magazine covers and headlines, the majority of black people are still living at the bottom of life in America. We have 50% of the prison population, but we only represent 13% of the overall population, and it goes on. So I would say that the situation is the same because the system is the same.
Mm-hmm. So Obama, the presidency of Obama didn't make a difference?
Well, if you can identify a difference for me, then let me know, but I don't know of any. Obama continued the same agenda of George Bush before him. And actually enhanced that agenda. The United States is still in Afghanistan. Obama went into Libya and killed Gaddafi. We have Hillary Clinton laughing about it. He didn't do anything to disturb the incarceration rate in America and all the laws that support incarceration and mass incarceration. He did nothing about the levels of poverty. He followed a pretty strict neoliberal agenda. Blaming the victim for the crime, saying that the problem with black people is the black man wasn't taking care of his family, so forth. And so, no, it didn't make any difference. It was a symbolic difference for some people, but I would say that like many other kinds of programs that are put into place to sort of distract us, it was a bright and shiny object that didn't really amount to very much of anything when we look over it and look at the substance of what Obama did or did not do, not for just black people, but for anybody. Mm-hmm. Poverty in America is very high. Homelessness is high. Unemployment is high. Even though people give you a number that's lower, it isn't. And so, you know, the Obama administration was just one more administration that continued the systemic a system that permeates the American government, which is really a capitalist system.
After the Martin Luther King assassination, there was the Robert Kennedy. And the day Martin Luther King was assassinated, Robert Kennedy made a speech. He said, what kind of nation we are? And what we need in United States is love, wisdom, and compassion towards one another. well, what kind of nation you are. More or less the same nation.
Right. Well, I think Robert Kennedy, as a very rich white man, was just saying some very nice things, but his whole family, of course, represents the antithesis of what Martin Luther King represented. You know, the Kennedys came out of a very rough history with his father, who was, you know, something comparable to a mafioso. They didn't get their money as anybody else did from doing nice works. Robert Kennedy was introduced to the poverty of America by going into the South. I think he probably had some concerns about that. I think they had a sense of general concern, but that doesn't mean they were prepared to really make any serious changes or to give up their own situation for anything else. So compassion doesn't translate into ending poverty. It means that maybe I'll give you some money if you're on the street. It could mean that if you're homeless, I'll give you a meal. I'll do some charity work around the world, you know, like buy bicycles for people in Rwanda or something. You know, see, this has nothing to do with questions of freedom, liberation, self-determination, something you ought to know something about. Sure. Here. So self-determination doesn't come because I'm compassionate. I can just be helpful and be a really nice person, and that doesn't mean that I would oppose that, but I'm saying that those are you know, words that have very little meaning in terms of what America is about. Dr. King was killed not by some arbitrary person who just didn't like black people. This was a government assassination, and it was done for a reason. Dr. King had influence over many, many millions of people. His voice reached millions of people in the U.S. and around the world, but he certainly could have brought, as he was organizing, not only black, but poor whites, Native Americans, everybody else, whosoever will, let him come to D.C. and demand that the government stop using money for war and put some money into the hands of the people who really need it, and that is the poor and then people who don't have a job or people who don't have any means to make a living. And it is that, in my opinion, that was the last straw for Dr. King. We should remember just quickly that he was under the surveillance of the FBI at all times. And while Robert Kennedy and J. Edgar Hoover were not friendly, Robert Kennedy was certainly a part of that same system that had put Dr. King under surveillance.